distinction is not between religious and not religious, but between absolute and non-absolute forms of belief? Is that really the relevant distinction we should be thinking about?
No, I mean, because to begin with, as Thomas Hobbes reminded us, the thing that's different about religious belief is it's not just your time on earth that's at stake. That throwing in eternal life changes everything. And so the stakes are different. And also, religion responds to questions that very few ideologies can respond to. However noble it might have been to fight for the victory of the working classes and the revival of Russia after World War II, let's say, that's small potatoes compared to a highly developed theology that explains your place in the world, your place in eternity, the role of nature between you and God. It's simply a much richer answer and also more powerful answer and it's not just because it gives you virgins at the end. It's that it actually puts your action in another perspective. And there's something that is that can be both deeply degrading and highly ennobling in that, depending how it's cast. If it's simply that you are a cog in the wheel, you are simply on your knees, it is utterly degrading to the human condition. If, on the other hand, it calls out of you the best that is within you and allows a kind of self-mastery to overcome what's low in you, then I think it has to be admitted that there's something ennobling in that.
And it's also tremendously flexible. I mean, I think that's the other point, and this goes back to what Christopher was saying about people who try to explain the rise of Islamism as though it were solely a result of people being poor and depressed. The point is that the Islamist movement is capacious enough to include both sincere religious belief and a political component, so that it appeals to, the children of the rich in Egypt. Ayman al-Zawahiri is from a well-established family, or Osama bin Laden's from a super rich family, and also to the poorest people. And it offers them a religious worldview and a political worldview and a cause for action. And the sort of recoiling from that is the secular reaction that says there's a fundamental confusion here, that we need to be separating the political sphere from the religious sphere, just doesn't have resonance for people who see these things as working together so richly and effectively, and they have an advantage. I mean, it's an advantage in politics to be able to tell people that what they're doing matters for the ages and for eternity, and it's an advantage in religion, I actually think, to be able to tell people that there are things they can do in this world that will have an effect. The otherworldly religions that call for complete withdrawal from the world, they'll always be with us, but they tend to be small.
Well, that's why I'm surprised you argued against the idea that people have this God-shaped space inside them. It does seem to me quite clear that for most people, it's not satisfying to say that you would do a right action because there's a trade-off in humans that is evolutionarily self-selecting, helps us to evolve, that we respect people who are willing to sacrifice for the tribe and make reciprocal gestures of goodness. You want to be able to say, no, you do it for something more transcendent than that. You don't want just a utilitarian calculus. And that's, I think, incredibly important. I think it's distantly related to something that intrigues me very much, which is the extreme appeal of religion to women. In almost all countries and cultures, that women are more religious than men. And I have a feeling that that's a...
What is your theory about that?
I haven't got a theory about it. Well, I do have a theory that I think women are more superstitious than men because of the possibility of losing a child.
So that's the need to propitiate, because
they know,
fickle gods.
Such a small thing can lead to such a terrible disaster, and maybe any propitiation that might ward that off is worth trying.
Well, I want to go back to
it's a bit materialist. By the way, on the virgin point.
Yes.
As people who have studied Judaism will know, and as the Muslims will learn, with every 72 virgins come 72 mothers-in-law.
Finally, an answer to that canard. So, but let's spend the next few minutes talking a little bit about Islam, because the way Mark was characterizing the difference between religion that actually can serve a kind of valuable public and social purpose, that is, religion that enables individuals, and ones that are ruinous, those that in effect compel obeisance and the diminution of the self, I think a large part of people's fears about Islam, even leaving aside jihadists, is that Islam tends towards precisely that kind of self-abnegation. And therefore, as it becomes politically enabled, what it enables is various forms of authoritarianism. Is that a stereotyped or prejudicial or narrow-minded view of Islam itself?
Well, I think it's a wrong view. I don't know if it's those other things.
Forget the other things.
I think it's wrong.
Okay.
I mean, so Islam doesn't have a doctrine of original sin, doesn't think that people are need salvation, that the human character fundamentally needs salvation, does think, however, that one ought to live in submission to God on the grounds that he is God. So it's definitely a religion that requires that sort of obedience to divine sovereignty. But in those respects, I think it's not so fundamentally different from Judaism and Christianity, with which it's obviously intimately related. And, the Western fear
from which it is plagiarized, you mean?
Well, again, I think only in the sense that, any great work of literature is plagiarized from the earlier great works of literature. I mean, if you want to use that as the general form, then fine. I don't object to the term. But, it's as though, I don't know, this happens to me all the time. I'm speaking in front of an evangelical audience and someone comes over to me and they say, listen, you seem to have some understanding of the scripture, and I just don't understand, why don't you see that the prophecies of Isaiah are so perfectly played out, in the gospel? And I say, well, I entirely, see what you mean. Just it might be that the person who wrote the gospels had read Isaiah. So, And similarly, in the Muslim world, I'm regularly asked a version of the same question. You seem to have, read these books, and how can you not have ipso facto just become a Muslim? One of the important Muslim teachings is that the divinity of the Quran is manifest just through its beauty. And to that, there is no good answer. It turns out the only thing you can politely say in the Muslim world, and everyone will let it go at this, is you can say, it would make my parents very sad if I became a Muslim. If you say that, everyone understands that filial piety comes ahead of anything else, and that ends the conversation.
You don't say the thing about the virgins and the mothers-in-law, do you?
Well, but the reason that I'm making this point is just that when we project our fears onto Islam, which we do, which is not to say there are things to be afraid of, the list of things that we think we're afraid of often is not the actual set of things about which to have great concern. I mean, in the case of the Muslim world today, what's of concern to me is that far and away the most vital and lively movement in the Muslim world is a movement that's interested in combining politics and religion. And the reason for that is that the secularist tendency, let's just say, certainly in the Arab world, of Arab nationalism, is seen as having been a failure. Not that it was exclusively secularist, but it had a kind of secularizing move. Arab nationalism was supposed to replace the Islamic ummah or community. And when that failed, people said, oh, well, let's go back to the other thing. So what's worrisome is that we in the West have been on the side of the same dictators who have failed, and secularism is now tarred with the brush of autocracy. And that's an extraordinary tragedy.
Should we in the West be more overtly supportive of movements like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt?
Well, I don't know about overtly supportive, because we're going to end up disagreeing on many, many substantive issues with the Muslim Brotherhood. The question is, should we be actively supporting governments that suppress the Muslim Brotherhood, like, say, the government of Egypt? And on that view, it seems to me that it can't possibly be the right strategy in the long run from a self-interested perspective. And from a moral perspective, it also seems wrong to me, because you're not going to convince... I mean, you're not going to do good by putting people in prison and torturing them and expecting them to no longer be Muslim brothers. The Egyptian government has done that in one form or another for a century, and it's been a total failure.
So where would either of you guys draw this line, in effect, between forms of Islam that we think can actually be socially valuable in the end and forms which are destructive?
Well, I think the important thing to say that may either unite or divide us is that it's very important to distinguish Plan A from Plan B. Plan A, wouldn't it be wonderful if we woke up tomorrow and we discovered liberal democratic institutions, separation between public and private, privatization of religious belief in the Muslim world? One can accept that principle and say, it ain't going to happen. It simply is not going to happen. What is your Plan B? And I'm surprised by how many people I talk to in debate have no Plan B. First, I need to convince them I'm with them on Plan A. What do? They're there and they're staying. Not only there, they're here, if you're talking in Europe. So you have a very, very serious problem that has to be addressed in the terms in which it presents itself. And that's why I think we have, in fact, a large stake in thinking about these questions and in encouraging a lot of this is not going to depend on us, but we at least have to have our heads straight about it. This is why the